Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Mike from Accounting by Clyde 2003. It was early September in central Idaho, and fall had begun to paint the Lemhi mountain range in flecks of amber and crimson among the sea of pine forests. The air was crisp, carrying that chill that signaled the start of elk hunting season. To find the best herds in this area of Idaho at that time of year, you had to climb high, really high. During the summer elk favor the high-elevation pine forests, where the vegetation is lusher and the temperatures are cooler than the sagebrush valley below. As winter caps the ranges in blankets of snow, the elk slowly migrate to the valley floor. It's the animal's natural cycle, and one predictable enough to help look for them during hunting season. Over Labor Day weekend, my two closest friends, Tyson, John, and I decided to take a week off of work to hunt elk. We'd been friends since childhood, but life had a way of pulling us apart. Families, careers, responsibilities. This trip was our chance to reconnect, to revisit that camaraderie we'd always cherished. We loaded Tyson's truck and drove for over an hour northwest from Idaho Falls into the heart of Idaho's remote central mountains. We turned off the little two-lane highway that snaked up the Little Lost Valley until we got to a familiar turnoff, and then headed up an old Forest Service road. FS 126. That little dusty road, no bigger than a dirt path, winds and curves through an unnamed canyon into the heart of the mountains. The Forest Service had long since let the road fall into disrepair. We navigated a couple of washed-out sections at the base of the canyon, but once we were up beyond the tree line, the road was more solid. It was slow going, though. The way was littered with fallen rocks and tangled tree limbs that continually blocked our path. After stopping every few minutes to clear debris, John and I decided to hike ahead, removing obstacles while Tyson navigated the truck behind us. It was a long climb up the switchbacks to the top, but as we reached the ridgetop, the remnants of an old mining claim came into view. Cleared and flattened back in the 1960s, the site now served as an ideal base camp. We set up our tents and kindled a fire just as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground. Gathered around the flames, we lost ourselves in conversation. We reminisced about old adventures and shared news stories about our kids and jobs. I swear we were laughing the whole time. The stars emerged one by one, punctuating the deepening darkness of the sky. The world was still and at peace. But suddenly, John raised a hand, his expression turning serious. "Did you hear that?" he said. We fell silent, the crackling of the fire punctuating the quiet night. Then I heard it too, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. They were deliberate and unhurried, obviously drawing closer with each passing moment. We exchanged glances, a mixture of curiosity and caution. Perhaps a deer, we thought, or maybe a bear wandering nearby. But then, emerging from beyond the veil of pine trees, a man stepped into the circle of firelight. We froze. He approached us as if strolling into a neighborhood bar. His walk was casual, his demeanor affable. A bright smile spread across his face, and we were totally caught off guard and watched him approach in silence. His hair was disheveled, and he had thick stubble across his face, like he hadn't seen a bathroom in weeks. He was dressed in a well-fitting tailored suit, oddly pristine for someone trekking through the wilderness. The style was decades out of fashion. The seams were subtly frayed, and what caught our attention most were his shoes. White sneakers, spotless and unscuffed, and probably clean given the circumstances. It was like he'd walked out of his house and right into our camp. "Evening, gentlemen," he greeted us with a smile and a nod. In the shifting firelight, his age seemed ambiguous to me. He could have been 30 or 50. "Evening," we all replied hesitantly. "Mike," he offered, taking a seat on a fallen log without invitation. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" "Sure is," Tyson replied with a slight waver. It made me feel a little better, knowing my friends were just as bewildered about this situation as I was. We engaged in small talk, though the conversation felt forced. Mike mentioned he was an accountant with a family in Boise, but when we asked for details, he'd either ignore the question or wave it away dismissively, as if swatting at a persistent mosquito. What threw me off was his mispronunciation of his supposed hometown's name. He called it Boise, not Boise. That didn't sit well with me. It was like he was reciting lines from a script and was unable or unwilling to deviate and improvise. When he wasn't talking, he hummed a tune softly, swaying ever so slightly. His gaze drifted, not quite meeting ours, often focusing just beyond us into the darkness. It felt as if he were expecting someone or something to appear from the shadows. If he felt uneasy or worried about something, he certainly didn't show it on his happy face. Tyson finally broke the uneasy rhythm. "You out here camping alone?" he asked. Mike seemed momentarily puzzled, then smiled broadly. "Oh, just enjoying the wilderness. You know, if something awful were to happen out here, it'd be a long time before anyone found out. This country's the size of Delaware, and they've only got 6 sheriff's deputies." Then he chuckled, and it was a hollow sound. An uncomfortable silence settled over us. John shot me a glance that mirrored my own unease. "Is that so?" I managed to say. "Yep," Mike continued, gazing up at the canopy of stars. "We're a long, long way from anywhere." His mood shifted abruptly. The jovial facade slipped into a vacant stare. The firelight cast eerie shadows across his face, deepening the lines and hollowing his features. "Are you feeling all right?" John asked. Truly worried about the guy. Mike snapped back into reality. That smile of his returned. "Never better," he assured us. "Don't worry, I'm not crazy or anything, boys. I'm not a murderer or a demon." He laughed lightly, but there was an unsettling edge to it. Tyson's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Look, man, are you on something? You're acting strange." Mike ignored the question, humming that same little melody. The sway returned, and his eyes became distant. I decided it was time to wrap things up. I tried the only method that made sense at that moment. Standing, I slapped my knee in that old Idaho way. "Well, it's getting late," I said, forcing a smile. "We've got an early morning ahead." Mike nodded slowly. "Yes, lots to do." As he stood, a large hunting knife slipped from his jacket pocket, landing blade first into the soil. "Oops," he said casually, and retrieved it. "Can't forget this. You never know what kind of crazy folks you might run into out here." We watched in tense silence as he slid the knife back into his pocket. His gaze swept over us one last time, still not quite meeting our eyes. "You boys take care now," he said softly. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the darkness, the sound of his footsteps fading into the quiet of the night. We stood there, the fire casting long shadows, the weight of that encounter finally settling upon us. Sleep did not come easily that night. Every rustle of the wind, every creak of the trees seemed amplified, our senses tuned to the slightest of disturbances. The next morning we debated whether to pack up and leave, but ultimately decided to stay. We'd come out here to reconnect after all, and we weren't about to let one strange encounter ruin our trip. Yet, as we hiked through the mountains in search of elk, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We never did see Mike again, but his presence lingered. an unspoken question hanging in the crisp mountain air above us. Who was he? What had brought him to our camp that night? And where did he go? We'll probably never know the truth, unfortunately. I Quit Dealing After I Was Mugged by Sparkly Tiara. I'm not proud of any of this. I have a big family and we're super close. When I was in high school, my aunt was dating this guy who seemed really wealthy, but no one really knew what he did. I think anyone could have guessed, though. I asked my aunt to introduce me to her boyfriend, and we talked about how I could work for him. Without going into too much detail, he let me work for him. I sold to some people I knew. I went to high school in an area where there was a lot of drugs, and I knew a few boys who claimed they were already using this stuff. I offered to sell it to them, and surprisingly, they had really big orders for me. I didn't ask any questions, I just went along with it. I was making about $3,000 a month from this. I mean, not enough to retire on or anything, but definitely more than most 17-year-olds made. I never made a point to flaunt my money or anything. I think I kept it well hidden. At least I thought I did. What bothers me is that there's no way of knowing. One Saturday morning, I walked over to my friend's house for a birthday party. Not a wild one or anything, just a cute little breakfast. On my way home, this guy I'd never seen before pulled over and got out of the car. He was well-dressed and a bit older. When he got out of his car, I thought he was a cop. He was acting like a cop, and I was ready to surrender because I didn't think I could make an escape. But then he pulled out a switchblade and said to give him my purse. He said something like, "Don't act dumb, girl. I know you have money. It's okay. We can make this easy if you just give me your purse." Again, I can't really explain this, but that just felt like such a cop thing to say. I don't know if you've ever been in that kind of situation, and I hope you haven't. But you kind of just freeze when someone surprises you like that. It's not really fear. Your body doesn't know how to react. I almost think my body didn't let me get too scared, because if it did, then I'd have a heart attack. Like my body said, wait until it's safe, and then panic. At first, I think I felt relieved that he wasn't actually a cop. I mean, thank goodness for that. And then when he said it was okay and that we could make it easy, it actually calmed me down a bit. So I managed to say, "Okay, can I just give you my cash? My purse has my phone and pictures and other stuff." He said okay. I opened my purse and I took out all the cash. I had about $200, and he watched me closely as I did it. He took the money and said something like, "If you tell anyone, I will find out." And then he left. I felt really calm the rest of the walk home. The next morning, it hit me that I'd been mugged, and that's when the panic set in. I started shaking and crying. Even as I'm writing this story now, it gives me chills. I'd never seen that guy before. When he said, "I know you have money," I don't know if he meant he knew about my dealing or if he was just trying to scare me. Honestly, I'm really glad all of that happened because it made me get out of that business at the right time. Things were only going to get more dangerous from there. It's still scary thinking about it, but that guy saved me without even realizing it. I told my aunt's boyfriend what happened and that I was too scared to keep doing that trade anymore. He just told me to send all my customers to him. So I did, and that was the end of it for me. It's been almost 10 years now, and I haven't looked back since. Possession or Witchcraft by Haven. This happened when I was around 12 years old. My mom took my siblings and I to visit her mom in her hometown in Mexico during our summer break. As soon as we got there, we were told to not wander close to the neighbor's house. Strange things seemed to be happening there. Apparently, the 16-year-old that lived across the street was possessed. My grandmother actually used the phrase, quote, had the devil in her. It started with the girl, and I don't remember her name, hearing somebody whisper. Then she claimed she was able to hear footsteps that followed her everywhere. She stopped eating, sleeping, and every morning she would find scratches and bruises all over her body. A priest had been called, and he had blessed the house several times, but it didn't seem to stop anything. The girl's parents had to send their other children to stay with grandparents because they were too scared to stay in the house with her as she was beginning to have violent and manic episodes. Some people in town said that when they walked by that house they felt uneasy, and some even claimed they saw shadows and heard strange noises. My cousins were scared to walk by there and would rather go the opposite way and walk around the block just to get to a store that was 2 houses down from that house. By the way, if it helps, this house was across the street from my grandma and 2 houses to the left. So 2 houses left of the house that was right across the street. I hope that makes sense. I'm not going to lie, I was scared to go over there too, but I also had this morbid curiosity. Every time we had to leave my grandma's house, I looked that way and stared, not really knowing what I was hoping to see. One morning, I woke to the grown-ups talking about what had happened across the street during the night. Apparently, a big stain appeared overnight in one of the walls, a stain that looked a lot like blood. They washed the stain with soap and water and painted over where the stain was, but by that next evening, the stain was there again. They went to get the priest, and once again cleaned the stain, then prayed while the priest blessed the house and threw holy water at the wall. By morning, the stain was back. The word around town spread, and people had gathered and formed prayer groups. It seemed as if everyone were praying non-stop. One group of people would leave, and then others would show up, and all of them were carrying their rosary beads. As I mentioned, my cousins, siblings, and I were under strict orders not to get close to that house. My grandma thought we might also get possessed, or something might follow us home. But of course, us being kids, we decided we wanted to go and look at this blood stain on the wall. So off we went, hiding behind other people so our grandma and mothers wouldn't see us. There were a lot of people, and not everyone fit inside the house, or they were afraid to go in, because there were a lot of people just outside the entrance. As we got closer, we heard a girl yelling as if in pain, and we also heard growling, but I'm not sure if the girl was also making these noises. Everyone there was praying the rosary in unison, but we were still able to hear the girl's voice crying and asking for help. Then she started yelling, screaming, and we could hear her growling. At that point, my cousins, my brother, and my sister had turned back in fear. My sister grabbed my arm and tried pulling me back, but I had to see for myself who was making those noises. I pushed my way inside the house, and what I saw next, I will never forget. I saw a girl tied with ropes to a banister of the house. She looked to be almost just skin and bones, and I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but it shocked me, and I gasped. For a second there, it almost seemed like she heard me and turned my way. I swear she was staring straight at me and smiled. I was frozen in my spot, unable to move. And then I felt someone pull me back so hard I almost lost my balance. It was my grandmother, and she was dragging me out of there. I don't think I've ever seen her that mad. I mean, she was fit to be tied. As was the norm, I got in a lot of trouble for disobeying. But only this time, I was really sorry that I had. I was so scared. I kept seeing the girl's face and that grin in my head every time I closed my eyes. I thought for sure she was going to get loose and come for me. Days after that, we headed back to the U.S. The last I heard, The girl had gotten better. No one's sure if the priest coming over and blessing the house every day or the townfolk praying non-stop is what helped her. But they say that a witch, or a brujo, was also summoned. His belief was that this was not a demonic possession, but a very strong case of witchcraft or black magic. Apparently, whatever had happened to her was done out of jealousy. She was very pretty and caught the eye of the wrong man. After she got better, she was sent away to live with relatives in the U.S. I don't know exactly what was wrong with her, or how she got better, but all I am sure of is that I saw her with my own eyes, saw the condition that she was in, and heard the most god-awful noises coming out of her, such as I'd never heard before. Many years have passed, but this is something that is very clear in my memory. I'll never forget that face and that smile. It still scares me to this day. Semi-Truck Driver by Cheese. I grew up in a small town, primarily Hispanic. Everyone knew everything. We had something here and there, of course, but other than that, not too much stuff happens there. To put it simply, I'm overweight, and not to the standards of beauty, really. I remember reading a meme online once where it was a joke about, "Can't catch me or kidnap me since you can't carry me. Keep eating cake." And I laughed at that and was like, oh, it's so true. God, I didn't realize that would come back and bite me. I was 18 or 19-ish, I believe, and it was nighttime. My weed plug was doing a stash and dash, and being broke and desperate, I went for it. I figured, I grew up here, I know all the areas. And what made this more tempting was it was actually not far from my area at all. So I said fuck it, was on a video call with my boyfriend and told him I was going to go for it. He stayed on the phone with me and I headed out. Now, mind you, it was late. The areas I had to cross through were not well lit, and I left with nothing on me. Not even my taser, alarm, or pepper spray my dad always made me have. Oh, and to make things worse, I snuck out because I didn't want my dad to know I was hunting for weed. So, as you can tell, this was already starting out great. But I set off. I had to cross railroad tracks to get through to the area, and it was pitch black. Only the main road in the distance was lighting it up, and some lights from a warehouse nearby. Other than that, it was hard to see. I made my way towards the main road and noticed a semi parked on the side of the road. I mean, not unusual. Semis park there all the time, ever since I was little, so it was nothing too weird. But then I heard, "Hola! Hey!" I looked over and saw a man in a semi-truck. He looked generic, I'm not going to lie. A Mexican guy with a red long-sleeve shirt. He looked like any other guy I'd seen around town. But his smile, I don't know. It was just off. I waved back, being polite, and he gestured for me to come over and started speaking Spanish. But I don't know Spanish. I know what you're thinking. One, why don't you know Spanish if you grew up in a Hispanic town? And two, why weren't you running? Parents never taught me to run, sue me, and he was far away, so I just kept walking. I sheepishly responded that I didn't speak Spanish, in Spanish. I learned that phrase just to say it to people, and waved him off, quickly walking away. My boyfriend asked me, "Who was that?" And I told him just some random semi-truck driver. I went on with the night. I think I was out there for about 40 minutes at that point, and I realized I wasn't going to find anything. Big sad. So I started heading home, still on the phone with my boyfriend. I kept talking, but my phone was dying, which was actually what made my boyfriend tell me to go home. So I started walking back. I went down the road and looked down the pitch-black area where the railroad was, and I stopped. I just had a bad feeling. something told me to not go home just yet. I told my boyfriend I was going to go and look at the other end of the street. That was towards where the warehouse was, giving off the light, but I had to pass by empty trailers partially hidden in the shadows. I started walking, and I made it to the light, and I heard movement behind me, and, hey, I turned around hella quick and saw the same semi-truck driver, with the same smile he had before. He came out from behind a trailer that he would have been hiding behind. He had his right hand tucked in his pocket, and was positioning his body to where he was hiding whatever he had even more. He said, "Come here," and started getting closer to me. I immediately told my boyfriend to wake up his dad and come and get me. I backed up quickly and was trying so hard to think. The man saw me on the phone and immediately had a mad and an annoyed look on his face. He stopped and actually started hiding behind the trailers more. I booked it down the road telling my boyfriend to come and get me or have his dad come and get me. I didn't want to call my dad because even at that moment, for some reason, I was still terrified of getting caught sneaking out. I ran across the main road to the little mini-mart across the street and hid behind an ice machine. I told my boyfriend I needed to call someone and hung up on him, and I called my friend, who thank God was out with his girlfriend. I told him I was in danger and needed him to come and get me, and I told him where I was. While I was waiting for them, I stayed behind the ice machine and saw the guy in his semi. I saw him look around for me and then shake his head in disappointment before driving off. Even at that moment, I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel safe until my friend pulled up. Everything hit me once my friend got out of the car, and I hugged him crying. He and his girlfriend calmed me down and took me home, and I got a little lecture from my boyfriend. But at that point, I'd rather take the lecture than anything else. I was lucky. Way too lucky. The false sense of security my weight and looks gave me really shattered after that, and I'm glad for it. It terrifies me to think of how things could have turned out if I didn't have my boyfriend on the phone with me. So, semi-truck driver, let's not meet. I never want to see your smile ever again. Weird Happenings in the Ohio Valley by Zealous Ideal. When I was about 10 or 11, my dad lived in an old farmhouse way out in the country in southern Ohio. I mean, the nearest one stoplight hamlet was about 10 miles away, and the nearest proper town was about 10 miles from that. It was a late 1800s house on about 30 wooded acres. One day, me and my brother, who was 4 years older than me, were up in the woods with our dog. My dad's rule was that the dog had to be with us if we were going into the woods. We were just tooling around and being rambunctious kids. And after a while, we came across what I can only describe as a dilapidated shack, which had to be at least as old as our house. It had just one room with a dirt floor. We went in and found a very old and deteriorated feather mattress laid on the ground, some silverware, and some old kerosene lamps. Being rowdy young boys, we took great pleasure in breaking what was left of the lamps and carving our initials into the wall of the shack. At that point, it was getting to be sundown, so we started heading back down the hill to the house. But our dog wasn't moving. He was fixated on the tree line behind us, and his hair was raised, and his head was low. No matter how we called him, he wouldn't budge and started to growl a low, rumbling growl. Then we heard laughter coming from somewhere in the woods. It sounded like a chuckle at first, and then it turned into a full-on belly laugh. We booked it down the hillside after that initial confusion was replaced by fear and adrenaline as this laughter continued, but our dog charged the other way. I heard a commotion behind me about 30 seconds later. It was the dog catching up with us. But then he wheeled back around and stood his ground again, snarling and barking all the while. This repeated till we made it down the hillside and got back into the house. I don't know who or what we encountered in the woods that day, but a few things are certain. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. Our dog sensed something in there before we did, and he did not like it one bit. After that incident, he would frequently sit staring at the tree line in the backyard. I've been back to that property since, and now it's overgrown and thoroughly abandoned, which just adds to the creepy and unsettling vibe the place already had. I couldn't bring myself to actually set foot on the property beyond what's left of the driveway the last time I was there. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Again, this property is pretty far out of the way for this to logically have been a drug addict or something. And it was far and away not the only incident to occur out there, but in speaking with my brother about it even now, 16 or 17 years later, it still slightly rattles both of us. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or my podcast, email it to UncleJoshTrueScaryStories@gmail.com. I read them all. Hope everybody is getting as excited as I am for the Halloween extravaganza. That is coming out shortly, so stick around for that. If you haven't done so, consider giving this video a like and maybe even subscribing. Leave a comment down below and I will get back to you. I love to hear what you think of the stories. Follow me on social media, links to that are in the description. And if you'd like to take your support of the channel even further, find a link to my Patreon page or consider purchasing some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. You can check out all of that stuff at my TeePublic storefront. Link is in the description. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.